I should have left you in that rain." That was the first thing Alexander Rossi said to me in his penthouse, 80 floors above the city, the skyline stretching for miles like a kingdom made of glass and light. And I remember thinking how strange it was that the most powerful man I had ever met sounded almost human when he said it. 3 months earlier, at 11:07 p.m., I was standing on a sidewalk 12 miles away from that building, rain soaking through my coat, my heels sinking into the gutter, watching my husband's taillights disappear without hesitation, without apology, as if leaving me behind was as ordinary as turning off a lamp. I didn't scream. I didn't run after him. I just stood there, water dripping from my hair, my mascara burning my eyes, and realized I had never felt smaller. Then headlights cut through the storm. A black car slowed. Not flashy, not loud, just certain. The window rolled down a few inches and a voice, calm and steady, said, "Get in." No pity, no questions. I should have been afraid. Every movie I'd ever seen warned girls like me about men in cars like that. But something in his eyes didn't ask for obedience. It expected strength. So I opened the door and slid into leather that smelled like cedar and rain. The city went quiet the second the door shut. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't ask why I was alone at that hour. He simply handed me a clean handkerchief and looked forward as if the decision had already been made. Streetlights passed over his face in gold and shadow, revealing sharp lines, controlled breathing, the kind of stillness that makes other people move first. I noticed how other drivers slowed when they recognized the car. I noticed how the doorman at the building we pulled up to straightened instantly, opening the door before the engine fully stopped. I didn't know his name yet, but I knew he was used to being obeyed. Inside, the lobby glowed in warm marble and soft music. No chaos, no rush, just quiet power. He finally looked at me under the crystal lights and asked, "Do you have anywhere safe tonight?" Safe. My husband had never used that word about me. I shook my head. He nodded once, like he had expected that answer, and said, "You do." Now, it wasn't romantic. It wasn't dramatic. It was a statement. That was the first night I learned the difference between being kept and being chosen, and I had no idea that the man who picked me up out of the rain was about to change the direction of my entire life. The next morning I woke up in a room that did not feel borrowed. Sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, soft and gold, stretching across a space larger than my entire apartment had been. For a moment I forgot where I was. Then I remembered the rain, the car, the way he had said the word safe like it was a contract. I sat up slowly, half expecting regret to rush in, but all I felt was quiet. My clothes from the night before were gone, replaced neatly with simple cotton loungewear folded at the edge of the bed. Not extravagant, not intimate, thoughtful. I walked barefoot across cool marble floors, following the faint scent of coffee. The city looked different from 80 floors up. Smaller, manageable, as if problems could shrink with enough distance. He was standing near the window, jacket off, sleeves rolled back, speaking calmly into his phone. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Whoever was on the other end listened. When he noticed me, he ended the call without hesitation. No irritation. No surprise. Just awareness. There was already a cup waiting on the counter. Black coffee. No sugar. I realized he had noticed what I ordered the night before at the lobby bar without me saying a word. That unsettled me more than the penthouse did. I thanked him. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. He studied me for a second, not in a way that measured beauty, but in a way that measured resilience. "You can stay as long as you need," he said. "Not you should. Not you must. Can." The difference mattered. I asked him why he stopped last night. The question had been sitting in my chest since midnight. He glanced back at the skyline before answering. "You were standing in the rain like you refused to disappear." That was it. Not because I looked helpless. Not because I looked lost. Because I did not run. I laughed quietly, shaking my head. I was abandoned. He corrected me without missing a beat. "You were revealed." The words landed somewhere deeper than comfort. I felt something shift inside me, something I had buried during years of shrinking myself to fit inside someone else's expectations. My husband used to say I was too emotional, too stubborn, too much. This man, who carried silence like authority, looked at the same traits as if they were assets. A knock came at the door. A man in a tailored suit stepped in, nodded respectfully to Alexander, then to me. Respectfully. Not curious. Not dismissive. Respectful. I realized then that whatever world I had stepped into operated on codes I did not yet understand. And yet, standing there in borrowed clothes with city light warming my skin, I did not feel owned. I felt observed. Chosen. There was a difference. He walked closer, not invading my space. Just enough that I could see the faint scar near his collarbone and the steadiness in his breathing. No one leaves you in the rain again, he said quietly. It was not a threat. It was a decision. And for the first time in a long time, I believed someone meant it. I did not expect to stay past breakfast. That was the lie I told myself while I stood in front of a closet larger than my old bedroom, staring at rows of tailored jackets and dresses arranged by color like a private gallery. None of it felt like mine, so I chose the simplest thing I could find, a soft gray sweater and dark jeans that fit as if someone had guessed my measurements with unsettling accuracy. When I stepped back into the main living space, Alexander was reviewing documents spread across a long glass table, the city moving silently behind him. He looked up once, taking in the fact that I had not tried to sneak out, had not asked for a car, had not called anyone to rescue me from this place. I need to go back to my apartment, I said, folding my arms as if bracing against wind that was no longer there. He nodded immediately. No argument. No persuasion. You will not go alone. It was not possessive. It was procedural. We rode down in a private elevator that moved so smoothly I barely felt the descent. Outside, the same black car waited, engine running, as if it never truly turned off. The city, at noon, felt different than it had at midnight. Louder. Ordinary. When we pulled up to my building, I noticed something I had never seen before. The cracked paint on the railing. The flickering hallway light. The way the mailboxes leaned slightly to the left. From 80 floors up, my life had looked small. From the curb, it looked fragile. He stepped out first, scanning the street with a calm that felt practiced. Not paranoid. Aware. Inside my apartment, everything was exactly where I had left it. A coffee mug in the sink. A throw blanket folded too neatly. My husband's framed photo still on the wall. The absence was louder than any argument we had ever had. I moved toward the bedroom to gather a few essentials, but I stopped at the doorway. His side of the closet was empty. Drawers half open. The ring box from our wedding set on the dresser, lid closed. No note. No explanation. Just erasure. I felt the air thin in my lungs, but I refused to cry. Not in front of Alexander. When I turned around, he was standing a respectful distance away, hands in his pockets, gaze steady. He did not ask what happened. He already knew enough. Take what matters, he said quietly. I looked around the room and realized how little that was. A photo of my mother. A worn paperback novel. A pair of running shoes by the door. The rest felt like proof of a life that had ended before I noticed. As we stepped back into the hallway, my neighbor Mrs. Thompson peeked out, eyes widening at the sight of the black car downstairs. She looked at me differently. Curious. Calculating. For the first time, I did not shrink under it. In the car, as we pulled away, I watched my building disappear in the rearview mirror. I expected grief. Instead, I felt something unfamiliar. Possibility. Alexander glanced at me briefly. You are not going back there, he said, not as a command, but as a conclusion. And for the first time, I did not argue. By the time we returned to the penthouse, the sun was beginning to set, turning the glass towers outside into sheets of fire. I carried one small duffel bag. That was all that remained of a marriage that had once filled an entire apartment. Alexander noticed the size of the bag but said nothing. He did not offer sympathy. He offered space. I placed my things in the same guest room, folding them neatly into drawers that smelled faintly of cedar. It felt temporary. I kept telling myself that. Temporary shelter. Temporary distance. Temporary strength. When I stepped back into the main living area, the atmosphere had shifted. 3 men in tailored suits stood near the long table, speaking in low, controlled tones. They stopped when I appeared. Not startled. Not annoyed. Simply aware. Alexander did not dismiss them immediately. Instead, he looked at me and asked, "Are you comfortable?" It was such a simple question, but the room seemed to wait for my answer. Yes, I said, and meant it. Only then did he turn back to the men and continue the conversation in measured sentences that sounded less like requests and more like decisions. I did not understand the details. I did not need to. What I understood was the effect. Every word he spoke carried weight. Every pause carried expectation. Later, when the men left, The apartment grew quiet again, as if power itself had stepped out with them. I walked toward the window, watching traffic far below move like threads of light. "They work for you," I said softly. He joined me, standing a respectful distance away. "They work with me," he corrected. There was a difference in that phrasing too. I studied his reflection in the glass. "What is it that you actually do?" I asked. He did not smile. He did not deflect. "I solve problems," he said. Calm. Direct. It should have sounded intimidating. Instead, it sounded precise. I turned to face him fully. "And what am I?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. "A problem. A responsibility. A distraction." He held my gaze steadily, as if measuring the weight of the answer. "You are not something to be solved," he said. "You are someone who is underestimated." The words settled into me like warmth. No one had ever described me that way. Not too emotional. Not too stubborn. Underestimated. I felt my spine straighten slightly without thinking. Outside, the sky darkened into deep blue, and the city lights began to blink on one by one. I realized I was no longer looking down at the streets with fear. I was looking at them with distance. With perspective. Alexander stepped away first, giving me back the space he had entered. "There will be adjustments," he said. "People will notice you are here." I understood what he meant without explanation. A man like him did not move unnoticed, and neither would a woman standing beside him. The idea should have frightened me. Instead, it felt like standing at the edge of something vast and uncharted. Not controlled, not trapped, just changed. I looked out over the city again and felt the quiet certainty building in my chest. I had lost a husband in the rain, but I had not lost myself. And for the first time, I was beginning to see exactly how much that mattered. The first time I stepped out beside him after that night, the city did not feel distant anymore. It felt aware. We did not announce anything. There was no formal introduction. Just a quiet dinner reservation on the 32nd floor of a private members restaurant overlooking the river, the kind of place where conversations stay low and glances last longer than they should. I wore a simple black dress from the closet he had offered, nothing dramatic, nothing that screamed for attention. Still, when we walked in, the room shifted. Not loudly, not obviously. Chairs paused mid-movement. A manager appeared instantly. "Good evening, Mr. Rossi." Respect wrapped neatly in every syllable. He placed a hand lightly at the small of my back, not to control me, but to guide me through the narrow space between tables. The gesture was subtle, protective without being possessive. I felt it all the same. We sat by the window. The river below reflected the city lights like scattered diamonds. I watched the way people tried not to stare. Curiosity is loud even when silence covers it. "Are they afraid of you?" I asked softly once the waiter left. He poured water into my glass before answering. "Some are cautious. There is a difference." I studied him across the candlelight. He did not boast. He did not perform. Power, I was learning, did not need volume. Halfway through dinner, I noticed a familiar figure near the bar. My husband, Daniel. His suit slightly wrinkled, his confidence thinner than I remembered. He had always loved expensive places he could not quite afford. He saw me at the same time I saw him. His eyes widened, not with regret, but with calculation. He approached our table with a smile that used to disarm me. It no longer did. "Emily," he said, as if my name still belonged to him. Alexander did not stand. He did not interrupt. He simply observed. I felt the weight of that choice. Daniel's gaze flickered toward Alexander, recognition dawning slowly. The kind of recognition that changes posture. "I did not know you had company," Daniel added, attempting casual indifference. I stood before either man could speak for me. My hands were steady. "You forfeited the right to know anything about my life the night you drove away," I said calmly. No raised voice. No trembling. Just truth. The words hung in the air heavier than any accusation. Daniel shifted, suddenly aware of the room, of the silent attention gathering. "We can talk about this privately," he insisted. I shook my head once. "We already did. You just did not stay to hear it." Alexander finally rose then, not towering aggressively, simply existing at full height beside me. 6 feet, 3 inches of quiet certainty. "She said no," he stated evenly. "Nothing more." Daniel swallowed, nodded stiffly, and retreated without another word. When I sat back down, my heart was racing, but not from fear. From clarity. Alexander's eyes met mine, searching not for permission, but for confirmation. "You handled that," he said. Not praise. Recognition. I realized in that moment that he did not step in because I was incapable. He stepped in because he chose to stand beside me, not in front of me. And as the city lights shimmered beyond the glass, I understood something undeniable. I was no longer the woman left in the rain. I was the woman who did not chase after a car that drove away. The ride back from the restaurant was quieter than usual, not tense, just reflective, as if the city itself was replaying the scene in slow motion. I watched the lights streak past the window and realized my hands were no longer shaking. Confronting Daniel had not broken me. It had clarified me. When we reached the penthouse, Alexander loosened his tie and set his keys down with the same measured precision he applied to everything else. "He will try again," he said calmly, not looking at me, but at the skyline beyond the glass. It was not a warning. It was an assessment. I slipped off my heels and walked toward the window, folding my arms against the cool air conditioning. "I know," I replied. The difference now was that I was not waiting to be rescued. I was choosing how to respond. The next morning proved him right. My phone, which had been silent for days, lit up with missed calls and messages. Daniel's tone had shifted from confident to desperate. He spoke about misunderstandings, about pressure, about how he had made a mistake. I listened to one voicemail in full, then deleted the rest without opening them. Alexander observed quietly from across the room, not intruding, not instructing. "Do you want them to stop?" he asked simply. The question held weight. I knew he had the power to silence any inconvenience with a single call. That was what unsettled me the most. "No," I said after a pause. "I want to handle it." He studied me for a long second, then nodded once. Approval without pride. That afternoon, Daniel showed up at the building lobby. I learned about it from the front desk, not from chaos. He had asked to see me. Insisted, apparently. The staff did not allow him past the entrance. They were polite, firm, efficient. I took the elevator down alone. The doors opened to polished marble and controlled tension. Daniel stood near the seating area, shoulders tight, eyes scanning the room as if measuring his odds. When he saw me step out alone, confusion flickered across his face. "You did not have to come down," he said quickly, glancing toward the security desk. "I just wanted to talk." I stopped a few feet away, enough distance to make the boundary visible. "You had your chance to talk," I answered evenly. "You chose to drive away instead." His jaw tightened. "You do not belong in this world," he muttered. The comment might have hurt me once. Now it only revealed his fear. I held his gaze steadily. "I do not belong to any world that treats me like an option," I said. No raised voice. No anger. Just truth. He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again when he noticed something behind me. I did not need to turn to know Alexander had stepped into the lobby. Not close enough to dominate. Just close enough to be present. Daniel's posture shifted instantly, pride dissolving into something smaller. "This is not over," he said quietly, though it sounded less like a threat and more like surrender. "It already is," I replied. I walked back to the elevator without looking over my shoulder. Inside, my reflection in the mirrored walls looked different. Not because of the dress. Not because of the building. Because I had finally understood something simple and powerful. Being protected felt safe. But choosing myself felt stronger. And when the doors opened to the penthouse again, I stepped out knowing that whatever came next, I would not be standing in the rain waiting to be saved. Power looks different in daylight. I realized that a week after the lobby confrontation, when I walked into Alexander's private office for the first time without knocking. The room was quiet, walls lined with dark wood and floor-to-ceiling windows framing the river like a living painting. He was seated behind a long desk, reviewing documents, two men standing across from him with the kind of posture that suggested they were waiting for approval. Not permission. Approval. He glanced up when I entered, and something subtle shifted. The men noticed it too. They stepped back half an inch. That was all it took. "Give us a moment," he said calmly. They left without question. I closed the door behind them and crossed the room slowly, not intimidated, not rushed. "You could have stopped Daniel completely," I said, resting my hands on the edge of his desk. "With one call." He leaned back slightly, studying me with that steady, unreadable gaze. "Yes," he answered. "No pride. Just fact." "Why did you not?" I asked. He was silent for a few seconds, long enough for the air between us to thicken. "Because you asked to handle it," he said finally. "And I do not take choices away from people who are trying to stand." The words landed heavier than any grand gesture. I realized then that his restraint was not weakness. It was discipline. I walked toward the window, looking down at the city that once felt overwhelming and now felt navigable. You are used to controlling outcomes, I said quietly. He stood and joined me, keeping a respectful distance. Control keeps things stable, he replied. I turned to face him fully. Control also keeps people small. The statement hung in the space between us. For the first time since I met him, he did not respond immediately. His jaw tightened slightly, not in anger, but in thought. You think I am trying to control you, he said. It was not defensive. It was curious. I shook my head slowly. No, I think you are not used to someone who does not need to be controlled. Silence followed. Not uncomfortable, just honest. The city hummed 80 floors below, traffic moving in steady lines, unaware of the shift happening in that office. He stepped closer then, not imposing, just present. Most people who enter my world want protection, he said quietly. They ask for it. They expect it. I held his gaze. I do not want protection, I answered. I want partnership. The word felt bold leaving my mouth, but it did not tremble. Something changed in his expression, something almost imperceptible. Respect, sharpened. That is rarer, he admitted. I noticed how his shoulders eased slightly, as if releasing a tension he carried out of habit. In that moment, I understood that power did not intimidate him. Vulnerability did. Not weakness. Real vulnerability. The kind that does not beg, does not chase, does not shrink. I stepped back, giving him the same space he had always given me. If I stay, I said softly, it is because I choose to. Not because you picked me up. He nodded once, slowly. Then stay because you choose to, he replied. No claim. No demand. Just an open door. And for the first time, I saw the truth clearly. He ruled the city with certainty. But with me, he was learning something far more dangerous. He was learning how to let go of control. The night he let me choose was the night everything shifted again. Not because something dramatic happened, but because something quiet did. A week after our conversation in his office, Alexander invited me to a private charity gala hosted in one of his renovated waterfront buildings, a restored warehouse turned into a glass and steel masterpiece overlooking the Hudson River. The event was elegant, understated, filled with city officials, business leaders, and people who understood influence without needing it explained. I stood beside him in a midnight blue gown that felt like armor stitched from silk. Cameras flashed softly at the entrance, not aggressively, just enough to mark presence. He did not place his hand on my back this time. He waited. A subtle pause. An unspoken question. I stepped forward on my own. Inside, conversations lowered when we passed, not from fear, but from awareness. I caught fragments of whispers. Her. That is her. The woman from the rain. The woman who confronted her husband. Stories travel fast in cities like this. I felt the weight of attention, but it did not crush me. It clarified me. Halfway through the evening, a councilman approached Alexander with a strained smile, attempting charm wrapped in political calculation. I listened as they discussed community investments and redevelopment plans. When the councilman mentioned a neighborhood project that would displace dozens of families, something inside me tightened. I stepped in before I could second-guess myself. What is the relocation plan for the residents? I asked calmly. Both men looked at me. The councilman hesitated. Alexander did not interrupt. There are resources, the councilman replied vaguely. I held his gaze. Specific resources, I pressed. The room around us seemed to quiet without instruction. Alexander's expression did not change, but I felt his attention sharpen. This was his arena, his negotiations, his outcomes. I was stepping into it uninvited. Or maybe invited all along. The councilman cleared his throat and began outlining details that sounded less certain than before. I listened carefully, then looked at Alexander. If you are investing, I said evenly, make it conditional. No family relocates without confirmed housing within 5 miles. Written guarantees. It was not emotional. It was practical, measured. He studied me for a long second, the same way he had the first night in the car. Assessing strength. Assessing conviction. Then he turned back to the councilman. Add that condition, he said calmly. No debate. No hesitation. Just decision. The councilman nodded quickly. Agreement secured. As he walked away, I exhaled slowly. You challenged me in front of him, Alexander said once we were alone near the balcony doors. His tone was neutral. I met his eyes without flinching. I partnered with you. I corrected. A beat of silence passed between us. Then something unexpected happened. He smiled. Not the polite version he wore in public. A real one. Brief. Rare. You did, he admitted. We stepped onto the balcony overlooking the river, cool night air brushing against my shoulders. The city lights reflected in the water like constellations turned upside down. You are changing things, I said. Quietly. He looked at me instead of the skyline. So are you, he replied. And standing there, above the noise, above the doubt, I understood something undeniable. He did not keep me because I was fragile. He kept me because I made his world sharper. And for the first time, I was not just surviving in his world. I was shaping it. The city looked different after that night on the balcony. Not because the skyline changed, but because I had. Weeks passed, and my presence beside Alexander no longer felt like an exception. It felt intentional. I began attending strategy meetings, not as decoration, but as a voice. I learned the rhythm of negotiations, the pauses that carried more weight than raised voices, the way he could end an argument with a single measured sentence. Yet what surprised me most was not his control. It was his restraint. One evening, long after the staff had left and the penthouse had gone quiet, I found him standing alone near the window, jacket off, tie loosened, the city stretching endlessly beneath him. He looked powerful, yes, but he also looked tired. You do not have to carry everything alone, I said softly. He did not turn immediately. It is easier that way, he replied. I walked closer, close enough to see the faint reflection of both of us in the glass. Easier is not the same as better, I said. Silence settled between us, heavy but not hostile. For the first time since I met him, he spoke without calculation. When you run a world like mine, weakness becomes a liability. I held his gaze in the reflection. Then stop calling trust weakness, I answered. The words were steady, certain. Something shifted in his expression, not dramatically, but undeniably. He was not used to being challenged without agenda. Not used to someone standing beside him without asking for protection or permission. I reached for his hand, not to cling, not to claim, but to connect. He looked down at our hands as if the gesture carried more risk than any business decision he had ever made. You chose to stay, he said quietly. Yes, I replied. And I will keep choosing to. But not because you saved me. Because we are stronger when we stand side by side. The city lights flickered below, steady and relentless. I thought about the woman I used to be, standing in the rain, believing silence meant survival. I thought about the man beside me, who had built an empire on certainty and was now learning the unfamiliar language of partnership. I cannot promise your world will always be calm, he said after a long pause. I almost smiled. I do not need calm, I answered. I need respect. He turned fully then, facing me without barriers. You have it, he said, not as a gesture, but as a vow. And in that moment, I understood the truth that had been unfolding since the night a black car stopped beside me in the storm. He had the power to command a city, but I had the power to change the way he ruled it. Not by force, not by fear, by choice. And this time, neither of us was walking away.